Non, ça marche pas. Ah, voilà.
Great, I think the microphone's working. So good afternoon again to all of you. And so in this heat, you might think that this theme might feel a bit arid, because AI is everywhere, particularly in finance and in our lives, everyday lives. But it's something that's really important to talk about. And you're going to see this is a really fascinating subject. So in order to present the subject to us, we've got Olivier PASTRÉ, who's written quite a lot on this issue, and he's going to do the introduction in a few moments. And then we'll hear from Marie BRIÈRE, who has worked a lot on these questions. She's an academic, as well as working for Amundi Investment Institute, and she'll give us a bit of a presentation of issues around AI linked to finance. Then we've got Jean-Paul MAZOYER from Bancaires, and you'll be talking about the impact of AI. David DUPONT-NOЄL as well, Olivier PERONNET from Finexsi, and MARZO from Bain. You're going to be explaining to us the issues associated with AI in finance, which are fairly complex and sometimes difficult to assess. And sometimes we we wonder whether actually AI is just going to further destabilize the financial system. Is it just going to generate more fraud, or is it going to make it possible to combat fraud more effectively? There's a whole debate around that. So, Olivier, perhaps I should let you just give an overview of the situation so you can just explain where this whole theme comes from and the impact of AI on finance. Yes, good afternoon. This panel session is going to be the most fascinating of all of these sessions for the Rencontre d'Aix, like every year. This is because we have the best journalists in France and also the best panelists on this subject, which really interests all of you. On the panel, I'm the only one alongside Nicolas, who's I'm not competent, but I'm not completely useless. I'm here to give you the context. And so I'm going to give you 6 certainties and 6 questions. And since I'm a real coward, the 6 proposals, it'll be up for them to offer the proposals, because that will be what's hardest and is what will be most interesting. So in terms of what's really easy and not very interesting, let's talk about the certainties. So 3 of them are good pieces of news. First of all, artificial intelligence has not developed as quickly as we thought it was going to. There's been an acceleration, but it was originated in 1958 in Dartmouth University, and the principles of artificial intelligence were set up then. So that's some time ago, nevertheless. So things don't always necessarily go as quickly as we might imagine, but we'll come back to that. The second certainty is that machines will never positively fight against people. We can do whatever we want in terms of AI around healthcare. We will always need a doctor. Excuse me. That's because of the air conditioning. We can do whatever we want in terms of finances and banks, where AI is particularly useful, but we're going to need bankers and financiers who are going to hit the button or agree to the loan or do the investment. So let's not be completely terrorized by the arrival of these new technologies. If we compare with the first industrial revolutions, of course, there are at least 3 differences. First of all, even if AI isn't going as quickly as we thought, it is accelerating, and that cannot be contested. And this is different from the other industrial revolutions. The second industrial revolution is the subject of our panel session. It doesn't just impact production, it also impacts intangible elements. And I would say this is alongside finance. Finally, Europeans and the French have not, this is a certainty, they've not understood the importance of this revolution. And here we've got this phrase that if we really go and look at this phrase that comes from the president of MEDEF in Italy, who said with the Industrial Revolution, he said that Americans do business, the Chinese copy, and the Europeans regulate. Everyone has their job, and that's what we do, and we're kind of in that triangle, which is, of course, a bit negative for us. So that's it for the certainties, which are generally positive. There are 3 negative certainties, which cannot be contested, and I hope that we're focused on that. But AI is increasing inequalities between people, between businesses, between industries, between countries. And so it really is important to understand this. The second certainty is that there's a major issue associated with data protection. When we were preparing this panel session, Marie was saying, well, we know this, but that's rubbish. There is an issue associated with data protection, and that's something that's really very important. The final certainty is that we really need to avoid, it's really essential that we avoid false solutions. If people say that artificial intelligence, I don't care about it. So I'm thinking here of intermediate-sized businesses. We saw what happened in the 19th century. In the 19th century, with the Luddites, who in England, who tried to avoid progress, but that's just impossible. And then in terms of questions, I've got 6 questions. These are not in order of importance, just in any order. The first question is does artificial intelligence increase risks? And in particular, in finance, does it increase what we'd call systemic risk? This is a key issue. There are questions that I'm asking that don't yet have answers, but at least we need to ask these questions in order to reach the third part, which will be the proposals. The second question is there a difference in the financial world around AI between banks, insurers, and investment funds? I have a sense that, yes, there are different business models here, and artificial intelligence will affect this sector in different ways. And around the table, the theoretical table today at this roundtable event, we're going to try and answer that question. The third question is Europe, as I was saying, that Europe hadn't been sufficiently prepared and it's been regulating. Is Europe beyond hope? I have my answer. I hope there'll be another answer from this session. The fourth question is what regulation is necessary? We need regulation, even though there's too much regulation in Europe, but we need regulation, particularly in this field. So what regulation needs to be put in place? And the last 2 questions are to do with the industrial policy that we need to put in place. What funding needs to be put in place? This is true at a European level and at a national level. There's investment that needs to be done. It's not Nicolas Dufour with his big talk that's really going to sort out the problem. So we need to make investment decisions. And so the 6th question, which I think is probably the most question, is perhaps the most important question, because it's about training. What training do we need? Because we're going to need to draw in professionals. We're going to have to see people changing professions, and it raises the question of training. This is the only way that's going to lead us to put in place a reaction at a political level. And so this is a really major question. So on the basis of this overview, we're not going to be talking about artificial intelligence. We're going to be talking about AI, but we are going to be talking about innovative imagination. Thank you, Professor. From my ignorant position, I just want to slightly nuance something that you're saying. In terms of AI, I'm not totally convinced that the US is inventing and China is copying. I don't think that is necessarily true around AI, although, yes, of course, we do have the regulation role. BRIÈRE, what does academic research say in this field? Have we started doing research into this question? They're starting to provide answers around these questions of risks. Thank you very much, and delighted to be here despite the heat. Before we talk about risks, let's talk about the advantage and the benefits, because a lot of us on this panel are actually quite enthusiastic about the progress that artificial intelligence makes possible. Let's come back to the risk, because that's something that's very important. But I just want to talk about the benefits that we can get from AI, particularly in the financial sector, where I think there is increased agility to gain. I think this gives us operational efficiency. You might say, well, what does that matter? But I want to show you that actually there are real social advantages, and society really benefits from this in the financial realm as well, because it really does impact our customers. So what are we going to do with artificial intelligence in the financial field? Well, first of all, it makes it possible to better exploit data and exploit new data. So this is all these alternative data which are not quantitative data. This could be textual data, image, sound. We can also exploit satellite data, and this is going to make it possible to better assess risks and make it possible to better evaluate a financial situation, the financial situation of a business, for example. So that's a very important advantage. Another advantage, it's going to make it possible to access data in real time. So satellite data is now available in real time. Before we were waiting for reports coming out every quarter. Now we have satellites that are measuring economic activity by taking photos of car parks in supermarkets, for example. So we have real-time indicators that are making it possible to get information a lot quicker, and therefore this could potentially make the markets more effective. Of course, this raises a whole bunch of questions. We'll come back to this. Is this information that we are getting much quicker? Is it very good quality information? Well, that's a question we need to talk about. But this kind of data is going to make it possible to do predictive analysis. We're going to analyze the data of customers in order to think about loans in management of assets, which is what I work in. We're going to be able to assess financial markets and financial rates associated with this data. Another benefit of AI, which is really growing very strong at the moment, is to do with customer relationships. Today, when you talk to a human customer relationship manager, sometimes you're talking to a person and sometimes there is no real relationship. We know that sometimes advice can sometimes be biased, but artificial intelligence is going to make it possible to improve this, either by giving information to advisors, that this will give them the most relevant information that they have on you, from the information that you've given them, but also you could also have a direct connection with an AI tool. So, of course, some of you, we're already experiencing chatbots. But for the moment, we're not yet trying to actually put customers directly in contact with a machine, but that's something that's coming. We're testing ChatGPT and large language models to see whether it would be interesting for them to be customer-facing and whether they're going to improve customer relationships. So that's the second key improvement that I think we can see. Questioner, are you sure that this is progress? I'm not. Of course, we could debate about whether this is progress, but you can test large language models. They're not actually bad at giving financial advice. The question is to do with fiduciary funds, because actually if they start working directly with customers, that might be complicated. We can also see that large language models can also manipulate us. And so there really is a question of responsibility, because the bank is liable for this responsibility if human beings are dealing directly with machines. But artificial intelligence systems are better than a bad financial advisor, and not everyone has access to advice. I think it's something that's really important. Olivier said this. It's important to talk about this. Not everyone has access to a financial advisor because it costs money. That costs money. So there's a possibility for this to become more general. AI is going to provide tools for people who don't have tools, and I think that's something that's really very important. The third point in terms of operational effectiveness, and this is the most technical part and perhaps the aspect that raises the least questions, but it's true that AI makes it possible to access data much more quickly, to do compliance checks, to check fraud, etc. And all of this adds value for financial institutions, of course. Then we were talking about risks. And yes, there's this question about whether AI is going to create new risks. That's the question that we're asking in financial institutions. A lot of academics are asking these questions, of course. Are there new risks that we might not have imagined? Well, it does make it possible to improve the informational efficiency of the markets because we get information quicker. And so the prices better reflect the information. And that's important because if prices directly reflect information, we're going to do a better allocation of assets. And we're going to be, therefore, able to better spread out money in the economy. But one of the questions that AI raises is that this information that comes from AI may be manipulated. So we know, for example, there are some business leaders here who might confirm this, but businesses don't communicate in the same way since they've understood that AI is listening to them. AI is analyzing their text because they tend to add words that will be positively interpreted by AI. So there's this risk of exacerbated manipulation, which is exacerbated by social media. So there is a balance in terms of speed and quality. Now we can access data much more quicker, but it's not necessarily of good quality. So this can generate noise and create volatility. The systemic risk would be associated with this volatility, and we can come back to this later.
In fact, in terms of AI, it can be a formidable tool for fraud. How do you see things? I don't know if it's a new risk for financial institutions, but it's a mean to limit our risks, to limit fraud. I'm sorry, Marie addressed this through the analysis we can do on the granting of credits. We use it a lot to detect the loss of a client, to know if a client will leave us or not. With the algorithms, we can analyze that. There's one field that you didn't mention where AI plays a major role for the reduction of our risks is cybersecurity. And all the companies are equipped today with security centers that analyze billions of logins in real time. It's obvious that it's impossible to do that without artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence will enable to already enables, and even more so tomorrow, to deal with the false positives and to have a much faster analysis of the attacks and everything that deals with cybersecurity. Another field is the field of payments. We implemented through Bancaires, or Bancaires, it's a company. I don't want to talk about my company, but just to give concrete examples, we process about 1 billion payment authorizations every month. This billion is analyzed on a permanent basis with algorithms to check if the transaction is valid or not. And we also process 1.5 billion authentications, that is to know if it's the right person who is doing this operation. And we have algorithms and systems that have, in 80 milliseconds, analyzed hundreds of variables for each payment to see if the payment is valid or not. And this is able to reduce in the field of payments by 15% the fraud rate. And Marie said that it wouldn't be possible. It's only possible if we have the right volume of data. If we have a volume of data that's relatively high, structured, well organized, enabling to use it for large volumes. So I didn't talk about what we have on the customers with the customer relationship. There's a lot of sectors and fields. And for years now, where artificial intelligence, traditional AI, not necessarily generative AI, takes up an important position to reduce fraud. And more, and you said that, we will have tools available that not only will replace the human being, but augment. When I said about cybersecurity, we replace the human, just impossible to have the number of people needed, but in the field of fraud, we also need that to solve the problem, or at least address it. David Deverman, you are director of Deloitte. Do you have a view on all economic sectors? The deployment of AI, of course, it involves colossal investments. Will need to be done. And there's also an issue of sovereignty. Olivier made reference to that. How do you see things from your side? AI, well, we need to is much more efficiency. We have to acknowledge that. Capacity to process data. We already had AI on the basis of data processing and so on and so forth. Limited to analysis. From the analysis, we went to hypothesis, and from the hypothesis, we moved to the decision-taking process made automatic. We see the influence of AI will have on all our operations. Before entering into details, I'd like to talk about the first risk in terms of financing of AI, is to have the financing needed to implement it. And today, among the major designers of AI, NVIDIA, AMD, Intel, all American. Among the producers of AI, those who manufacture the chips, not a single European in the 10 leaders. We have the Koreans, Americans, the US, the Chinese. ST and Microelectronics is 12th and 14th producer of these CPU cards. So we see there we are dependency, 63 billion spent in the US in 2023, 10 billion in Europe. But luckily there's a reaction from the French government, maybe a leader in Europe with this new plan recently published. 10 billion over 5 years, 10 billion a year. We're pretty far from what the U.S. is investing. But today, AI, if we don't have it freely available, what would it mean? It means that we'll have the remaining portion will be totally dependent in terms of cost, price, and usage. First risk, big risk. Second risk is consumption, energy consumption. Data centers today represent 1.54% of the global energy consumption. It's Saudi Arabia. In 2030, it'll be 3%, exponential need for energy. So here, there's an issue of energy dependency. And to answer your first question, it calls for a massive mobilization in Europe. Not to encourage companies. No, we have to build infrastructure. We have to build data centers. We have to boost the European champions who are capable of producing and give to all the European states the tools and analysis. The first point. Second point. With finance. Finance works on the basis of trust. And it's an issue of trust here. When you prompt an AI, you do 1 + 1. Well, you say the result is 2. Well, in biology, 1 + 1 is 3. Yes, in biology, 1 + 1 and a child is 3 in management. 1 plus 1 is superior to 2. Why? Because being 2, you're stronger than 2 separate units. So, you know, the paradox of AI, how to deal with that. If you talk about these, if you consider that questioning and the questioning of, you see there's a loss of trust. Loss of trust in the financial system is a disaster. It's chaos. What you need is to have to reestablish trust, and it's based on 3 things: to have people that are well trained. The government talked about that. And we must, in education, be very proactive there. The second point is to have a control system, government system that is strong, appropriate. You need to have actors that are people that are trusted. And the third point is to have a set of rules. I know we're very strong in regulations, but if there's a sector in which you need regulations, it's the sector of AI. I was talking about a rupture and things, but each time you have a rupture, well, you need to set rules. We had the, you know, when we started dealing with roads, we had to establish rules for cars and things, capital. And the other point in terms of risk is, Jean-Paul, you raised that earlier. It's the risk of seeing the system go wild. You know, on the basis of fakes, fraud, your bank advisor, it's his voice, it's his face and everything, but it's not him, it's not the right person. I mean, it's a deep fake. And, you know, there's a risk of going into a loop. We have a very good example. When you use Waze, Waze, GPS, everybody follows Waze, and in the end, you end up with a massive traffic jam next to the other traffic jam. So you see, when you massively use this tool, well, you may run into problems. So what do we have to do? Well, we have to maintain the relationships. We have to understand, when you automatize all bank transitions, you know, when the AI interact with each other, how can you keep control? How do you maintain control? So you have to be able, for younger generations, even for ourselves, to remain critical. It will be essential before we use AI, and because for me, for those who will use AI properly, the people who will be able to reconcile the efficiency of the tool with this critical and independent view. Those who are lucid enough and who have the courage to keep to their opinions. You know, say it's 90% right, 95% right, but founded on known thesis and scientific facts. And the third point that will be essential is to keep the responsibility, the decision-taking process, who will be responsible, and to avoid delegating to the tool this responsibility. And so I think these are the new risks and new challenges that will affect the world of science with AI. Olivier PERONNET, very good transition, because you work in the field of the assessment of enterprises. So in some cases, can the IA replace, not totally, but in the larger part, the judgment you may have on the value of an enterprise, of a company? Well, this AI will work practically as well as a human being. But so good afternoon to all of you. Very happy to take part in this round table. My question that rises for assessors is an existential question, in fact, because will the machine be able to replace human beings? So being an assessor will no longer mean anything. The machine can provide a reliable response and everything. So we studied that a lot. We gave a lot of thought to that. It's an existential question. And inside an organization, the International Evaluation Council, who works on these issues, and they are studying the impact AI can have on the assessment processes and evaluation criteria. So first thing that we noted, if you look at AI and evaluation, the evaluation process, everything that leads to give a rating of an asset, of a financial instrument, what have you. So using AI is, without question, a tool that enables to make big productivity gains. You interrogate the machine, it's capable of discussing with you. You can make it evolve in its research. It's surprising, and everything concerning the search for information, you know, the selection of parameters, the use of algorithms or complex models, and more generally speaking, for companies who supply data like Reuters and Bloomberg use it, AI is everywhere. AI is everywhere, and it represents considerable productivity gains. It even goes further than that. Whether it's predictive or generative, it can cover a large spectrum of the evaluation process because it can draft reports in human language, and that's what's special. It's this dialogue with the human and the machine, the man-machine dialogue, how the machine can overcome the human. And so the lot of us share our personal experience in the usage of AI. The first thing we've noted, the first observation when it comes to making recommendations, is that the professional judgment is at the heart of the use of the machine. This was said when we talked about opinions. The professional judgment is the key element. And so the tool that AI represents is a tool. But there's the issue of responsibility for the assessor to use AI to replace him or herself is something that is impossible, not fully. So the use of AI, and that's where the human is very important, gives rise to a lot of questions on the quality of the information. The English say garbage in, garbage out. The quality of the information that can come from AI is questionable, but in any way it must be challenged to be sure it's reliable. I've experimented. There's a famous case, you know, not in finance, but for lawyers, a lawyer that had pleaded before an Australian court judge talking about case law in Australia, but after doing the necessary controls, this case law was false. It was fake, and so there was a trial of his client with the lawyer for using case law that didn't exist. It was made up by AI. So AI presupposes that the human being using it is critical. And in the assessment job, AI cannot be a black box. This goes back to the issue of responsibility. We can't make the AI responsible for what it produces. We can't imagine our prescribers, whether they're stock exchange regulators. We can imagine a report. We say, you asked a question, I addressed this question to AI, and that's what AI replied. It's a good thank you, goodbye, but that's the final result. It's totally unacceptable, or and us as responsible for the assessment for all the people who use AI, no black box syndrome. You can't think. You have to know what data comes in, garbage in, garbage out. So you have to be careful. You have to control, you have to master control the whole process. Another important point in the use of AI, we talked about responsibility, input, output, quality of data. It's confidentiality. In fact, when you're going to be working for a prescriber, whoever they may be, they will give you information, and if you use this information in the AI system, issue of confidentialities are excluded. So the data protection, so it's clearly a formidable, wonderful tool, but it can only yield its full value through a human usage. As an example, and to conclude, I questioned ChatGPT on definition of professional judgment. Interesting to see the result, because if we all together here, we couldn't come up with such a definition by ChatGPT. So I quote ChatGPT: "The professional judgment can be defined as the capacity of an individual, generally in a professional or technical context, to take decisions that are enlightened and appropriate based on its expertise, its experience and knowledge, and also on a rational basis and ethical." So the question I decided to ask ChatGPT is, you ChatGPT, when you give me an information, do you consider that it was subject to a professional judgment and that can be used? And the second good answer by ChatGPT was, ChatGPT is not capable of exercising a professional judgment in the human sense of the word, and a lack of confidence, of trust and responsibility, lack of practical experience, lack of complete contextualization, lack of ethical judgment, and lack of real creativity. So I think everything's said there. It's a wonderful tool, but it has its limit, because the human being is also a wonderful tool. Thank you. So aware of its own limits.
So, Adam, you lead the Bain company. You help your customers. How do you use AI in your context? Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. Delighted to be with you this afternoon. So there's an intrinsic bias in the title of the session, where we say that AI and finance equals risk. And of course, yes, I want to say, yes, there is a risk around confidentiality, but the rolling out of AI in the finance sector is an incredible opportunity to reinvent our society. Why am I saying that? Well, because here this is a personal hope. I've been supporting a client in this journey, which is a technological journey, but is a really fascinating journey where we can see this is a real priority, but we need to understand what it is a priority about. And the question is not the tools, it's not the models, it's not the algorithms. All of that is available, but the question is how are we going to use these algorithms? And so that's what the work that's being done, so that it is relevant to the existence and the ambition of a company. So we're seeing this change happening. 80% of businesses that are deploying AI at scale consider that it has an impact that's beyond its expectations. And this question of expectations is, we've talked a lot about effectiveness and productivity. Is that the only impact that we're looking for from AI? No. Of course, we're going to have automated tasks, but we've also got new tasks, new professions. We've also got customer experience, customer satisfaction that's going to happen. So when we're at the beginning of the journey, and the maturity is not the same in all sectors, we need to think about why we're deploying this. So this notion of impact is very important, whether it's about agents who are going to help private bankers, and which will perhaps save us 30 minutes. But the question is, what are we going to do with these 30 minutes? And so we need to also answer this question at the same time as we think about how we're going to save time. When we have perhaps a colleague who's not going to have to go into 4 IT systems in order to produce a report, that's going to make it possible for them to better listen to clients, to give better recommendations, to be better concentrated, and that means increased customer satisfaction, and it also means a benefit for society, which is not just about reducing costs. On the other side, there are expectations, but there's also the capacity that AI gives us to think about the future and project into the future. When you work to deploy agents, to deploy staff, the idea is not to say, this is what I want you to do. I want you to do this sequence of tasks. That's not what we do with AI. We work with, that's not what you do with staff. We work with bankers and people on the front line to reimagine how they're going to do things in the future and how AI is going to help them. When you do that, you manage to do what is the hardest thing. You help people to be less anxious about this concept, because when you start these projects, there's a real anxiety in organizations. We need to reduce this anxiety from the beginning with an ability to reinvent what we're doing. That's where AI is going to augment humans rather than marginalizing humans. That's what we do. The third thing is that we need to say, well, that's the micro aspect, thinking about projecting ourselves. But there's also the macro aspect. Management teams talk about all the different things we're going to do. We have selection, we have a solution X, Y, and Z, but fundamentally we want to think about what are we going to obtain at the end, and it's this question that we're asking. So in order to come back to your question, are there going to be training needs? Yes, there are going to be training needs, but it's not about training, it's about reinventing the capacity to produce economic activities in a new way. So there are things that we will no longer do, there are things that we will do differently, and we have new capabilities which are going to come online, and we all want to have a world in which AI doesn't marginalize people, but makes people better. Thank you very much. Marie BRIÈRE, I interrupted you earlier, and you were talking about how you see systemic risks, and then perhaps we'll take some questions. But we've got this question of systemic risks. Sometimes we think about a bank that goes bankrupt in California and leads to a worldwide crisis. Are these tools going to increase this risk, or is it going to make it easier to prevent them? Well, the answer is probably both, but we don't really know today. There's a lot of academic work being done on this, and we don't really know the answer yet. The question really is about whether artificial intelligence models are better than conventional methods. Sometimes here we have some very clear examples with correlation which don't necessarily generate a systemic risk. So we have some pension funds in the United States, for example, which systematically transfer assets at the same time, and this is a problem. It doesn't create a destabilization because they buy again when the market comes down. So actually it stabilizes things. But in order for there to be for this to create systemic risk, these different models need to be correlated together, and they need to buy when the market is low. And actually, for the moment, there's no proof that there is a real correlation between these different models. Perhaps there are risks that might seem more important. We talked about inequalities. This is beyond finance, but I think it's important to ask these questions as financial players. We need to think about our impact on inequalities. I have perhaps more measured perspective than Olivier on this question, but I think we have to be very vigilant. Some tools reduce inequalities. So I've been working on this advising robot that gives financial advice. People that take this advice make better financial decisions than when they have no advice, because a lot of people don't know how to invest their money. But one of the issues, and I think that's what Olivier is thinking about, is lots of people don't access this kind of service. This is where AI can lead to an increase in inequalities. Some people are not even going to have access to this kind of service, either because they have an aversion to algorithms, and we know that people with less financial education are more hesitant about these kind of tools, or they don't have access to these tools. And this is why it's really important to educate and train people. And it's important as well that AI doesn't replace us. One of the issues is to use AI to educate people. And in terms of financial decision-making, there are robots that automate everything. Is that, i.e., that you give them money and then you don't have to do anything anymore? Is that what we want? That's a question, because actually it might be worth thinking about your finances. And it might be good to educate people using AI rather than simply delegating to AI. We have the same issues in businesses. Do we completely replace some tasks using AI, or do we keep humans in the loop so they supervise AI? And that's where we have this interaction between machines and AI. Thank you very much. Are there any questions in the room now? I think with some microphones around the room. There's a question that Olivier was raising that we haven't necessarily answered, but have you got any questions in the room here? Please, at the back there. Good afternoon. I am a student in economic and trade preparatory classes in Marseille. So I wanted to just raise a paradox. This finance is based on stability, trust, and international trade, but AI is often unpredictable and very difficult to regulate at an international level. How are we going to integrate AI into a financial system which is based on order and worldwide stability? Well, what a question. Who wants to answer that question? Well, perhaps I could say something about confidence and trust. Yes, this is really very important. The whole financial system is based on confidence. How can we put in place confidence? Well, we can do that by testing, and perhaps that's one of the recommendations. Olivier, you were asking us for recommendations in terms of policies to put in place. I think that we need benchmark systems so that we need to measure the impact of tools. We need to measure the capacities of tools to measure a task. There are a number of sectors where this is the case. And then we need to also measure the impact. I think we need to measure impacts in a greater level, impacts on customers, because we can give people artificial intelligence tools and see how it impacts inequalities, etc. Olivier? Yes, I am both at the same time totally depressed and full of hope. I'm totally depressed because, for people who don't know that, I am from the Camargue region in France, and when I go to a cafe in Arles, I see people and that's the only preparation I've done for this panel session, is just talking with people around me. First of all, people just get really mad, and then they say, well, what are we going to become? This question of inequalities is fundamental. It is the roots of populism that are found here in these inequalities. So I'm really depressed and concerned, because what is being said, and everyone's really very convincing, everyone's very pedagogical. But when I go back on Monday evening and I see my friends at the cafe and they say, you were in X to talk about AI, but then why are you full of hope? Yes, thank you. Well, I'm full of hope because these are young people. Before, at the Rencontres d'Aix, we used to talk about our children. Actually, now for most of it, it's our grandchildren. Our grandchildren need to be encouraged to develop training in AI of any kind, regardless of their intellectual capacity. And this was one of my questions about training. We've all got an action. We, as the elite, we all have grandchildren who are amazing, but we need to kick them up the backside and get them training. And if it's a good thing if they get trained in AI. Do you want to add something, Jean-Paul Mazoyer? Yes, in terms of the question that we had, I think transparency is really important. I think that businesses that are going to use AI, it's really important that businesses that use AI maintain control of algorithms, and that we can explain to our clients what we're doing with them. This transparency is a factor of confidence for clients. Clients need to understand what we're using these algorithms for, how it gives us such and such a result rather than another result, and how the staff of financial institutions are using these and are augmented through this. Ada? So if we could come back to what we could do to improve transparency, this brings us to this question of the fact that AI is not inevitable. It's us that created AI. It's therefore down to businesses to put in place the standards and the governance of this. businesses need to discern. Discernment is something that belongs to humans. Humans need to discern the rules and models to put in place a framework for using them. If we can't put in place rules, and here in Europe we are good at regulation, so we really need to think about how we can put in place supervising frameworks in businesses, because financiers need to educate the general public. If you think about the fact that 70% of Generation Z is ready to invest its money to an advisor robot, that helps you to understand how much financial institutions have to do in terms of education. And it's not just about managing risk in a standard business, but it's managing the risk of future generations. David. Yes, I was talking about the 3 pillars of confidence earlier, and I think in the financial system there's also the sequencing of AI deployment. The more we have algorithms, the more we create automated situations, the more we're going to have the kind of risk that Jean-Paul, you were talking about. So I think it's going to really be very important to have a development phase, or really limit this constant development of machines, that particularly in the financial system, particularly in the context of international connections. So in France, it might not be in the capitals market, but in other markets, because if everyone needs to sell at the same time on a market when everyone's got the same database and that give us collectively the same answer at the same time, we might get that result that you were talking about earlier, Marie-BRIÈRE. Another question, very fast question. Yes, I represent a group of African press called Financial Africa, and as you know, in Africa, investment in finance should make it possible to really see significant progress. But I want to give you just 2 examples. Would AI in finance in Africa make it possible to, 1, reduce risk analysis, which means that there's been an overestimate of risk in terms of African countries? Would it be possible? Would AI help us to reestablish things, rebalance things out? And then also the second thing, this idea of fiscal evasion in Africa. Could AI help us to avoid this? So I'm going to try and answer the first question. This African content with a lot of potential. There is a risk of instability, political instability, fiscal instability. I'm not sure that AI is going to make it possible to address these issues, which are linked to confidence and visibility, which are the sources of confidence. Confidence and visibility is what finance needs. So I'm not convinced that AI is going to help us with the first aspect around the financial questions in Africa. Thank you very much. Our time is up. So now it's on to the next session, and have a great session. Thank you very much.